Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of folks in and connecting to audio. We're about 1 minute away from launch. Thank you for joining us here today for our monthly webinar series. We've got a couple people still coming into the waiting room, so I'll give everybody a minute or so to get rolling before I start the formal presentation. Before I actually start get rolling with everything, I just want to say we are very well aware that this is not the most calm and mellow time in the world of Head Start, and you're all taking an hour to join us for lunch. I very much appreciate your time and coming in to join us as we talk about data literacy and professional development. We think that this is an important part of helping to cope with challenging times, although when we scheduled this, we didn't necessarily know the degree of challenge that would be out there for everybody. So once again, thank you for taking an hour of your time today to join us as we talk about an important topic that is going to be with us for quite a while in Head Start under the new performance standards, but also just as a general approach. So to start off with, we are just going to launch in here. I do want to say that this webinar is being recorded. We do share the recording with everybody who registered, even if they cannot be here. If you do have an issue with recording, we are recording it. So you want to take off, or you will communicate with us privately or via email after if you have communications that you want to ask about, but don't want to share it on the recording. So I'm going to launch into everything here as we go. For those of you who are not familiar with Acorn Evaluation and Acorn Learning, we're all about the people side of all things data. We offer professional development programs and consulting services around the use of data for program improvement. The focus there on program improvement, we are about the applied use of data for those specific purposes. We have two websites, acornevaluation.com, which is the main website for the company as a whole that talks about consulting services and a bit about professional development. If you just want to see the professional development offerings that we have, that's acornlearning.com. All the professional development offerings are there, as well as a calendar that goes all the way through the end of the year, including all the free webinars that we have as well, listed all the way through our last one that comes in December. So I'm Dr. Greg Dixon. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at Acorn, and my job is to make sure that we have lots of cool learning events that really emphasize the practical application in the real world of Head Start programs that are out there. So that's what I do with most of my days. I spend a lot of time now working on just building high quality experiences for everybody, and you'll see a calendar of what the different ones we have coming up look like, and I'm responsible for both the overall elements of those and teaching and facilitating as we go through in those programs as well. We're going to talk about webinar basics, how we use Zoom for the purposes of our webinars. We're going to talk about a shared challenge that all of us are facing right now in the Head Start world, one of many, but we're going to focus on one particularly. I'm going to talk about data literacy, what it is and what importance there is to this idea and this skill in our contemporary world. I'm going to talk about how to integrate data literacy into your program's approach to professional development and why it's an important piece of professional development. We'll have a review and Q&A, and then we'll wrap up at the very end with a sort of survey of what's happening with Acorn. So one of the biggest things that I always like to say is that if you do have questions, we do have in our webinar basics a couple of different elements that apply here. So first of all, it's being recorded. So if you do not want to share publicly, you can always contact us. My email is greg@acornevaluation.com. Live captioning is turned on, so there is a transcript. If you want to pull that down at the end, you can do that. All the participants are muted. There will be time in the Q&A if you want to unmute and contribute. We also have a short anonymous survey at the end. We talk about improvement and quality improvement over time. We practice that, so we do review everything that people tell us in those surveys because we do want to give the best webinar experience that we can to everybody who joins us. As I said at the very beginning, lots going on. You joined us for an hour today. We want to give you the most value that we can in these webinars. If you, one quickly, the slide deck will be emailed at the conclusion of the webinar along with the recording. We do send it out to everybody who registered. So if you have colleagues who registered but were not able to attend, they will get the recording and they will be able to watch it as well. If you have questions at any time, feel free to go ahead and add them in to the chat. And I will try to address any of them that are urgent right when they come up. Otherwise, I will tackle them when we get to the question and answer and review at the end. So there's a shared challenge. We have lots of shared challenges in Head Start. The one I'm really going to focus on today is a particular one that has arisen partly just by best practices for modern professional development, but also because we have new performance standards that talk to us about some changes in how the Office of Head Start is looking at professional development. The key here is that we do know, and if you want to know the specific section you can look in, it's 1302, and there's several subsections that relate to this. I'm going to summarize it with the information we have here. Head Start programs must offer professional development that builds staff knowledge and skills related to their work. There are a number of different components to that, and there's different approaches to whether or not that has to be sort of academic or professional development, but the focus is that professional development does have to be focused on the staff knowledge and skills related to the specific work that they do. So you have to tailor professional development plans for individual staff members to fit what it is that they want to do. I would add something that's not in the performance standards, which is also adding things of where they might potentially contribute in the future. Obviously, necessary job skills for what they're doing right now is important, but also one of the challenges is developing what we would call as a bench, a future group of people who will be able to step into leadership roles as they go on. It is helpful to be able to identify those individuals and start them on a path where they can see that future and those jobs that are going to potentially be there for them so that they have a sense of how they can advance and develop as individuals and professionals within the organization. Effectively engaging employees is a big piece of what we're also supposed to be doing. It specifically indicates that all professional development should be compatible with and integrated with employee engagement plans and processes. So you want to offer professional development that's going to provide knowledge and skills, but also that is engaging and really helps staff to feel motivated and engaged in what they're doing. This is a big piece of the puzzle for professional development, is finding ways to integrate that engagement process so that you're not just doing these periodic mandatory trainings and then staff are expected to just kind of remember everything from those trainings as they go on. How do we engage in professional development that doesn't just engage them in the moment, but engages them over time? There's a challenge in all of this. There's also another section of the performance standards that specifically talks about staff wellness. And we are supposed to be integrating a whole series of things that we're doing, one of which is professional development, into this overall contribution to a culture of wellness in our organizations. So we're going to provide professional development that is going to be fitted to the job and is also part of best practices around engagement. And it also has to support this larger question of staff wellness. One of the biggest challenges across the board in pretty much the entire service sector, but especially in Head Start right now, is there's a lot going on that puts pressure and feels very difficult and challenging for all of us. There's a lot of stress. So how do we promote a culture of wellness within this larger context? And this is a challenge that we face, and one that we definitely want to think about as we're developing ideas around professional development. I'm going to make an argument about data literacy as one of many tools for helping in the process of trying to overcome this challenge by building a culture of wellness, and how data literacy can play a strong role in that. Data literacy is something that I talk about a lot. I will freely admit that. A number of my friends get kind of annoyed. We're sitting with hot wings watching the USA play Canada in the hockey game last week, and one of my friends made a mistake of asking me a question about what I meant by data literacy. So I told him what I meant, and it was a very interesting thing because he kind of responded. He runs a company that helps manufacturers to improve manufacturing processes with some very sophisticated software, and in talking about that, he said, "Oh, this is interesting because we don't necessarily have any issues with that because we hire people in." And I asked follow-up questions, and he said, "Oh, maybe we do have issues with that." And the reason I bring up that example is data literacy. You do get people who say, "Is data literacy actually important? Is it something we need to worry about?" And you will even get people who work very closely with highly sophisticated batches of data and extremely sophisticated engineers and programmers and coders who ask this question. I have a bunch of responses to the question, partly because that's what I do for a living. One of the biggest things that I always say when people ask this question is if you go and look at surveys of employers, surveys of the workforce, data literacy is going to be one of the most in-demand skills by 2030. There is a huge gap right now between data literacy among people who are coming into the workforce and people who have been in the workforce for a while, and the needs that organizations, in fact, they call it the data literacy gap. They have a name for it. And if anybody's interested, you can ask us and we can send you a link to there's a data literacy project that has a very nice PowerPoint presentation that really talks about what this gap looks like and why it's important. But one of the things that I would definitely say is the simplest and easiest thing that you can see that's obvious is that a few years ago, if you went looking for data literacy in college and university curricula, you'd find very little of it. When I was building the curriculum for our data literacy credential that we offer with the National Head Starts Academy program, there weren't a lot of universities that had clean and clear definitions. MIT had a really nice one. I modify it. You're going to see it on the next slide, and it works really well. But there were very few. Now, colleges and universities are starting to add data literacy to not just specialized curriculum, but to their core curriculum. So in a general education requirement list, you're starting to see data literacy, not just for people in data science or statistics or computer science, but for everybody. And so you're starting to see schools that have these classes that every single freshman takes their very first semester or quarter, including data literacy components to it. So the core curriculum for colleges and universities are starting to include questions of data literacy. Now, librarians have been arguing for this for about 3 decades. They call it information literacy. But this is something you're starting to see. Having been a professor and sat on curriculum committees, the fact that you're starting to see more and more schools adding this is a reflection of a very strong sense of priority. And there's a lag between people realizing that it's a priority and when you're starting to see it. So there's an inertia building around this. If you want to get a sense of how widespread this is, even tech companies like Meta that owns Facebook and Instagram now provide data literacy training. And the first thought when I use this example for a lot of people when they come to that and say, well, of course they do. You're going to have all these non-data people who are coming in to these programs and they're working with all these really sophisticated software engineers and just people who are great coders. Of course, you'd want to have them take data literacy classes. When I say that tech companies like Meta are providing data literacy training, they're providing it to everyone, even their coders. The coders, the engineers, the people who are the most sophisticated data people on the planet, that's how you get a job at a company like that, have to take data literacy training for a simple reason. They're amazing software engineers and amazing coders, but they're not real good at connecting what they're doing to reality. They don't really know how to talk about what they're doing to non-data people, but also they don't think about the implications for what they're doing for non-data people. Just because you have the technical capacity to do something doesn't mean that you should do that. It's a challenge that a lot of these companies have. They bring in absolutely brilliant, like truly mind-boggling, brilliant people to do these things. But then they also have to have other people who can help them understand what that is going to mean for regular people. So when we talk about whether data literacy is important or not, it is clearly important in a way that surprises lots of people. If you had gone 6 years ago and gone poking around for major software platforms, major business information platforms, looking around for data literacy information, you'd have found almost none. Now you find tons. Even Tableau, which is a fairly sophisticated data visualization platform, now has a whole free set of training around data literacy. It's relatively basic and it's tailored towards specific kinds of people, but they have this on offer because it's so necessary. So data literacy is vital. It is important. It is a job skill that is becoming more and more and more just part of what people who are going to be successful in the workforce need to know. We aren't to a point now where it's a requirement in everything everywhere. We aren't seeing every job description, including elements of data literacy in it, but we do see it more and more and more. In fact, one of the easiest ways to have a wonderful job in companies like Meta now is to be able to communicate both with the technical people and the non-technical people, because this data literacy gap means there are relatively few people who can fill those roles. This is particularly true in Head Start programs because we have tended to think of data as something separate from all the other things, not one of many pieces of all those other things that are going on. So what exactly is data literacy? I've been talking about it here for 4.5 minutes. So what exactly is this thing that I'm talking about? It's the ability to read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data as appropriate for a person's role. A lot of times people focus on that first part: read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data. You should put just as much, if not more, emphasis on the second part: as appropriate for a person's role. What it means to be data literate is not the same for one person versus another. A teacher in the classroom and an executive director are going to be light years apart in what data literacy looks like for them. A teacher and a family advocate, they're going to look more like each other's sort of criteria if you want to determine what's data literate. But also there are going to be differences because of how they work. A family advocate is going to be reading data. What are the demographics of this family? How did they do on our screening that we have to look for family strengths and opportunities? They're going to work with that family, or they're going to work with that data to craft a picture of the family. They're going to analyze that information and communicate it with the family. Now, that could be talking with the family about goal setting and things that the family advocate who's looked at their information has a sense of where the family needs help, setting goals that go along with that, that the family also is interested in pursuing, because the qualitative data of what the family is interested in doing is just as important as the quantitative data that tells you all the check marks. Are they homeless? What's their income? Everything else. So the family advocate would be data literate if they are aware of all these different elements and they're able to use that information in that role. Obviously, an executive director is going to be very different. They have to aggregate information from all across the organization. Communicating with data is going to be very different. Also, that person in the executive director role, if they are data literate and implementing best practices in their program, is also going to be helping everybody else to become data literate as well. And so there's lots of different elements and lots of different challenges that can come along with these questions. And so this is an interesting element for us, because what it means is I have a very nice definition of data literacy right here. How does this actually apply in a program? One of the things that you will want to do when you're thinking about data literacy and you're thinking about professional development and how this is going to implicate staff wellness and the skills that they need, what does it look like? What would a family advocate need to be able to do in practice to say that they were data literate? How do you answer the read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data as appropriate for a role for the people that you were talking about? And this is important because we do very much want to emphasize this other piece. The other element that comes up is, as I've mentioned before, this idea of, well, is it really for everybody or is it just for data people? The answer is absolutely unequivocally yes. Data literacy is for absolutely everybody. It's just going to look a little different depending on what their role is. So every single person in Head Start, whether they know it or not, whether they identify themselves that way or not, is a data person. Your line staff are collecting vast amounts of data. They are also coding data. They're doing lots of other things. They're doing data entry. People who don't think that they're analyzing data are analyzing data. A teacher is looking at the creative curriculum results and the checkpoints as they come up and saying, okay, well, this child is stronger in these areas. They need more help in these areas. I'm going to design a curriculum for my classroom, lesson planning that I'm going to do in order to help my students and these children in the best possible way. That's data analysis. You're looking at data and you're making decisions based on it. This is a big part of it. So data literacy is absolutely for every single person in the program, and it's a vital part of how you're actually going to engage with people, helping them to see this and to see data as just a tool that they're already using and that they already have at least some degree of literacy in, because almost all of your staff are not starting from zero. In fact, nearly everybody will start from somewhere. This is a big piece of that puzzle. So when we talk about how important data literacy is and how it's going to be something that for each individual staff member, it's going to look a little bit different, what impact does treating data literacy as an important skill that's part of how people do their jobs, what is the impact of that on staff members as we work through and design professional development plans, and you've got to pick and choose what you're going to work on? How does data literacy fit? What's the importance of adding data literacy to those plans? one of the biggest things with this is a lot of these effects are going to go along with areas that also impact other things that they're going to do. So you're going to have trainings in one area that interact with trainings in another. One of the biggest things with data literacy is it contributes a lot to individual employee well-being. Most people, when you hear skills around data, assume that that's really challenging, really difficult. In fact, for a lot of people, they automatically assume they just can't do it. It's too much. So when you start showing people that they actually are data people, and that in fact, they're already doing data analysis, they just never thought of it that way. They're collecting and coding and making these important decisions. They just never thought of it that way. There's a pride that comes from that with the skills and knowledge that they have. So as you become more data literate and you're able to do these different things, there's something cool about that. You are analyzing data and communicating about it to families and making the lives of the children in your classroom better with data. Your group that you are working with as a family advocate, of all those parents that are out there, you're being able to help them to get the most important needs. And that data that you're collecting and communicating upwards is being used by the program to put resources in the areas that will benefit the largest number of families, biggest benefit for as many people as you can. That's fantastic. As you get a feel for that, you're now confident in those data skills, using them on your own to solve problems. You're able to say, I'm actually looking at and I'm evaluating data of all these families and helping them to set goals. I'm analyzing data and making decisions and helping people with that. Understanding the bigger picture and the impact of individual efforts are important. If you as an organization emphasize data literacy, the more senior members of your staff are going to be engaging in transparent communication about what's going on and why data is being collected. That means that line staff are going to be aware of and see all the things that come with all the hard work. I guarantee you, if I made everybody list a set of things that line staff absolutely look at and say, this is clunky, it's annoying, it just takes time, and I don't know what it's for because it just goes off into the computer and I never see it again. That understanding of the bigger picture that comes as more senior leadership practice transparency means that that person who's a member of line staff may say, all right, it's still clunky. All those other things are still true, but there's meaning to that because they need it for the PIR and that keeps our grant funding coming. So it might not be the best thing in the world for me as an individual to have to do because it's annoying, but at the same time, it's vitally important. And these kinds of things can be important in building well-being. When you have something that's not very fun to do or that's time consuming or it's annoying to do and you don't know why, it grates. When you understand and know why, it grates less. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't grate. It's still not great, but it will be uncomfortable. One of the other things that's really interesting about this is as data literacy spreads and as people get more comfortable with it, there's a much stronger sense of ownership for the data. You, as you are collecting this data, instead of just doing these different things, you actually see where you are in this process and you see the contributions you make to that bigger picture, but also you see how you can use that data for your own purposes. Most line staff are already doing this to some degree. When you start communicating with them about how this fits, there is that sense of, wait, I'm actually doing these things. These are skills that then can build and be added to over time. The ability to actively engage in data-related discussions and decision-making is something that oftentimes is overlooked. When we talk in our workshop on building effective teams for problem solving, when we talk about engaging staff with data, when we talk about designing a better meeting, a better pre-service, we have workshops on all these topics. Again and again and again, you will hear us talking about bring all of the people who are related to what you are trying to engage with, bring them to the table. Do not forget the person who's actually doing data entry if you're trying to solve an issue with the quality of your data that might come from the data entry stage of the process. If you don't have people who are doing the data entry, you're going to be missing something important. How do you convince those staff members to not run as soon as you say, hi, I'm putting a data team together? Well, part of that is you give them the data literacy to see the value in what they're doing, to see data as just another tool, participation in discussions around data as just a normal thing that happens, not a special thing that involves the D word and you're going to run away from it, but something that you can be proud of engaging in because, hey, if I join this data related discussion, and I really communicate how terrible this data entry screen is, maybe we can come up with a better way to do data entry. And then not only does the data quality improve, but all of us doing data entry have an easier time of doing our work. Or maybe there's not documentation around that. We have our webinar next month is actually about the importance of documentation. And one of the big things that we find is that sometimes it's just people don't know what they should be doing. They're not sure how to actually engage with this. And documentation can make a huge difference. And consulting the people doing the data entry about what the data entry documentation looks like is a vital part of this. So individual employee well-being is a huge part of all the different elements that come together. So how does this go to the bigger picture thing where we talk about a culture of wellness? One of the ways that we can make staff feel comfortable about where they are in an organization and feel that what they are doing matters, which is a big part of a culture of wellness, is understanding that all staff are contributing to data work. Everybody is. Everybody in Head Start is a data person. They don't think about it that way necessarily. They haven't been talked to in a way that lets them see that, but that understanding is there. There's a couple different elements to this that are important in that culture of wellness. First of all, why am I doing something? If you understand that question, you feel better. It's just a strange phenomenon of humanity. It's why there's the whole start with why movement. You always tell everybody why they're doing things. You tell them why you are doing things. It helps people feel better. Another part of this is that the language of data was developed by data people. It is not particularly welcoming. And one of the things that when you spread data literacy around, you can demystify some of that terminology. And you can make people much more comfortable with the vocabulary around data. This is one of the challenges, is that some of the language we have to use because it's the way you describe certain things. But when people understand what those terms mean, they understand that when you say data ecosystem, they know what that means. That's the big picture of all the things that are out there that impact data. Or organizational capacity. These are words that are out there that are technical. Having a shared vocabulary around data makes it much easier for people to understand, and they can feel included in the discussions much more readily when they have been instructed, when they have professional development around these different parts. The other thing about this, and the last point here, is the trust in data. And we've all been in a situation in which the data doesn't really look the way that we would expect it to, or in your gut, you feel something that the data doesn't show. And when people understand how data is collected and coded and organized, and when they are part of the process of evaluating whether or not the data is accurate, people will come to trust data more. Data is so often thought of as something that's going to be weaponized because, to put it bluntly, K-12 did this. K-12 fired principals, fired teachers, rotated people around, and basically made life miserable for people by misusing data. And I should put a little caveat. It's my personal view that those programs from the early 2000s misuse data. Other people would disagree with me. But it leads to a mistrust in data when you don't really know the details of the data, but you do know that principals were fired and these metrics were created that a lot of teachers felt they didn't have control over, and yet they controlled those teachers' pay increases and job prospects, everything else. When you have high levels of data literacy and people understand how data is used, the purposes of what the data is being collected for, and when the people they are working with are practicing good data transparency practices because they too are data literate, trust in data can be a lot greater. Your data will also be more trustworthy because you will have a much broader range of inputs on questions like data quality. So when we think about these things, there is an additive impact of this. As more and more people in your program become data literate, you build in stronger and stronger ways that culture of wellness. One of the fun pieces about this as well is you can build a sense of accountability and responsibility for data without being onerous about it and without seeming to be kind of coming down to people and getting people in trouble, things like that. One of the biggest things when you say, oh, we found there's a problem with the data, a lot of times that has to be somebody's fault. The reality is probably 90% of the time, if there's a data quality issue, it's not actually somebody's fault. It's a structural, systemic issue. And we have a whole workshop on how to break down the workflows to find those structural and systemic issues. I don't have time to talk about it here. Trust me when I say about 90% of the time, it's structural. And when it is people, it's usually lack of specific training and support, not any ill will among the people. But when you practice good practices and you provide that data literacy experience, that sense of accountability and responsibility for data is much stronger, partly because you are actually engaging them when a question of data quality comes up from the starting point. Again, if the leaders are data literate themselves and know how to actually implement these best practices, you start from the starting point of, hey, we've got a pain point here. Let's figure out what's going on and let's fix it with everybody inclusively in the discussion. That piece right there is very much part of this next part: increased staff engagement in planning and decision making. A data literate staff can really help you make big improvements in these areas. And a lot of times you find that there are win-wins. Oh, the structure isn't working right. There's something that's wrong. How do we fix it? Oh, wow. The people who actually do the data entry turn out to have a lot of suggestions about how data entry could be better. Sometimes you can implement them, sometimes you can't. The availability of resources for data-related support and assistance is a big part of building a culture of wellness. This is something that's oftentimes thought of, but not necessarily in this way. When we're talking about data entry, it isn't just enough to sit down with everyone and have a wonderful data entry screen. You want to ask people, what documentation do you need? How do you build the right kind of instructions? How do you set up a system where if you have a question, you can ask, what is necessary here to make it work? And how can you use that within your organization? What you are looking for in this is how can we make it so that we can save time and effort for everybody? Someone has a question, they have someplace they can go immediately and look. They may still have a question. Is there someone they can immediately contact? And then you don't have issues building up. You don't have a pressure on people to solve the problem themselves in whatever way makes the most sense for them. New staff members have a much smoother time in integrating. Staff members who have been around for a while but are moving into a new role have a much better sense of what they're supposed to do because you have good documentation on that. And again, a plug for next month's webinar is we're going to talk specifically about what some of those documentation circumstances can be. Okay, great. Hopefully by this point in time, you're comfortable with what data literacy is, and you've at least got some sense of why it helps to solve this challenge, or at least address the challenge that we're facing. So the next question is, now how do we integrate this into our professional development approach? Well, one of the things about data literacy is that there's a different set of ways that you can introduce it and reinforce it in your program. So there are formal and informal professional development elements that help support data literacy. So professional development should be thought of holistically. It is not something that is a pure standalone skill. This is probably one of the most important things. And honestly, this is where a lot of the industrial applications of this in some companies fails. They tend to think of it as a standalone. I would encourage any Head Start program to think about professional development around data literacy as being part of layers, and they interact with each other, they self-reinforce, but it needs to be there. And one of the challenges of this is it also means that you are going to be having individuals who are in management and supervisory positions who are still learning the data literacy skill, who are going to be working with people who they are going to be helping to also learn the data literacy skills. But when you ground it in the work that people are actually doing, that's when you have the best impact. So formal professional development that follows a plan fit for an individual's present and potential future roles. Obviously, current job skills, current knowledge, tackle that first. But then when you have people who are comfortable in those roles, they've had them for a little while, think about next steps. What might they potentially be able to contribute in the future? Is this teacher potentially somebody who might be moving into a supervisory role at some time in the future? Also, you're going to have informal professional development that includes skill building and, most importantly, the real world application of what it is that you're working with. So when we think about formal professional development, there's software specific training. And so this is if you're Child Plus, Go Engage, Copa, any of those, Microsoft Excel, anything else in the Microsoft universe. These are your kind of training and instruction things that are specific to certain software and platforms. The Data Basics course, which is part of the NHSA Academy program, is a 3-hour course. We built it. It's in their system, and it's 3 hours for anybody at all in Head Start. Literally anyone. It was made for line staff. It could be anyone, janitors, all the way up to executive directors, covers the basics of data in Head Start and the role that different folks play in contributing to that. Great foundational piece of it. NHSA also has the data literacy credential. We run that class through their academy program. It's an excellent way for people who want to get a much deeper, grounded understanding in a longer course, but with high levels of application orientation to the material. So it's focused on bringing things back and practicing in the programs. It's 8 weeks long. It's something that is a much more focused and organized professional development program. It's mostly for supervisors, managers, and directors. We have a variety of programs that fit other niches. We have the data analyst certificate program, which is for people that want to learn how to manage data projects and build data teams and then build visualizations in Excel. We have a bunch of workshops on specific topics. I've mentioned some of them about engaging staff with data, understanding workflows. We have one on building better guidance documents, those kind of things. And for people who are just getting started with this, we have our Head Start Data Camp, which is a great introduction for supervisors and above to kind of get a sense of where data fits together. And if you're thinking about these as a gateway, Data Basics is for absolutely everybody. Data Camp gives everyone a firm introduction into it. The workshops deals with specific topics. The data literacy credential at NHSA gives you a nice big overview. And then the data analyst certificate deals with more specific skills, especially skills in Excel. The focus in that one is teaching you a bunch of stuff in Excel as you go, and then talking about how to talk about it. Informal professional development is just as important. You want to make sure that you have that as part of it. In this, you are going to use little things in all the other stuff that you're doing. Informal professional development is not an ad. It is a transformation of some of what you're already doing into areas that include data. So what do you notice? Approach during team meetings, individual supervision. Have one data image, one visualization of data, put it up on the screen, and just talk about it for 5 minutes. The ideal, and again, this is one of the things that we elaborate on in things like the data literacy credential, but the short version of it is you have a story that you want to tell in one visualization. And you put that visualization up and you see how many people grasp that story right off the bat. That helps tell you whether your visualization did what you wanted to do or not. It also gives you practice in orienting people to the visualization. And then you try to guide the discussion to get people to see the story that you're working on. Sometimes that story is a puzzle. You're not going to give them the answer. It's a puzzle. Sometimes it is a story where you do have an answer. Sometimes you're using it to celebrate the hard work of other people. What do you guys see here? What we see here is our family advocates did an amazing job this year of connecting the needs and opportunities that we identified with our family outcome screening tool to the goals that those families set. 75% of our families set a goal in an area where they had a demonstrated need. In the real world, that's good because there's a lot of families that may need something, but they're not interested. And it's going to take a year or two of developing that relationship to get them to see that they have to do that. So 75% alignment on that, fantastic. An image or something like that where you say, oh, look, this is really interesting. Conversation spur. It encourages everybody, regardless of their data literacy levels, to engage with data because you're going to visualize the data and it's a picture. If you describe the picture right and build it right, anybody can engage with it. In meetings, include data discussions. Don't always bring data problems. Don't make it an anvil you're dropping out of the sky every meeting. Have data discussions around celebrations like the one I just mentioned. That is an important piece of the bigger picture. Peer supports can be a very important part of this. So data tours or data walks, these are somewhat the same kind of a thing where you basically say, I've got 5 things with data. I'm going to put them up on the wall and we're going to go look at them and we're going to talk about them. Data parties where people come together to talk about data. If you're a really big organization and you've got people who are spread out who are using these kind of things, data parties are great. Group data entry and coding events. You've got some issues with data quality or you've got a bunch of new people, bring them together and talk about, hey, what does this look like? Let's all do data entry on these same 10 things and see if we agree on what it looks like. Hey, let's read this narrative. If I read the narrative about the family, what do I think the greatest area of need for this family is? Does everybody agree? How do people feel differently about that? And peer partners. You got some new folks, pair them with people who've been around for a little bit so that they have questions. They have a peer they can ask, so they don't have to go to their boss every time they have a question. Make them feel more comfortable about it. So the other piece of this is you do want to have professional development around data literacy, and really all professional development, whether it has to do with data literacy or not, should be sustained over time. Coaching to support any training that you're doing in pre-service. Don't just drop stuff on in pre-service and expect them to be able to follow through for the rest of the year. You want to have that supportive element throughout. Professional development for supervisors on what's called sustainment is important. If you're going to say you can come to your supervisor and ask them for help, you better have trained that supervisor to actually provide the help. And so multiple layers of scaffolded professional development so that everybody in the process knows what they need. This is the most important thing that you can think of. All professional development should follow an appropriate scaffold or professional development plan, intentionally designed for the person who is undergoing professional development. Now, you can create ideas about what it looks like for particular roles, and here's an example of what that looks like. In this particular case, I want to do professional development for teachers. All my teachers across the board are going to have kind of the same structure, and then we'll vary it as we need to, depending on specifics for the particular teachers. In Orange, I have basically technical skills having to do with the tools that you're using. So platforms, my teaching strategies, Core, Learning Genie, my ASQ, I could go through dozens of them. Do they know how to use them? This is a teacher. That means they don't have to become magical wizards who can do all sorts of things with them. But how do they work? How does that matter? What is it that they need to be able to do to use that platform effectively? Remember, if we're talking about my teaching strategies, we want to be able to go in there and look at, I'm putting the core curriculum data in there and I'm getting reports, I'm getting checkpoint results. Am I using this platform to the extent that I can to make sure that my kids in my class are getting the things I need? What's the professional development your teachers need to be able to answer yes to that question? Yes, I know everything I need to know about this platform to meet the goal of helping my kids. Some of that's going to be data related, some of that's not, but professional development on the platform is key. Program management platforms, Child Plus, Go Engage, COPA. How do you use those? How do you look at reports? How do you understand the information that's in there? Productivity, that's Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all these different kinds of pieces. If you use Google, Google Docs, and so on. How does that all work? Those are platforms. Technical skills, they talk about, okay, I can use these platforms. Data literacy skills. I have Head Start Data Basics here. This is a classroom teacher. That might be it. That might be the only data literacy class, the only structured formal content that they take. Data literacy, they might also find that in free online content. Now, one of the things here is that there's stuff that you are potentially going to do, that's the blue on the far right, where you're not just going to be doing this around data literacy, you're going to be doing a whole bunch of different areas. But there might be a data walk, and the data walk is intended to show how working in my teaching strategies, combined with some of the things that they have learned about data literacy, gives them the ability to do this data walk and see how what they're doing in my teaching strategies is contributing to something larger at an organization. Or for new teachers, you might actually have samples. What would you do in these circumstances? Here's 4 different classrooms in the data walk, and all the new teachers with a couple of veteran teachers interspersed. How would you build a lesson plan for this class? That's not data related in the sense that you're saying, oh, we're going to teach you data by doing this. But data is integrated into what is ultimately not about the data. The data walk isn't about data. It's about learning how to design an appropriate lesson plan in your classroom. Pre-service, obviously, you're going to have pre-service every year. You're going to have different pieces in that. And then how do you follow up on pre-service and build that in? Coaching. You're coaching teachers on a bunch of different stuff. One of the things you want to have in there is if you have built in ideas around data literacy, if you have built in those other pieces, they're related to the coaching. So on the left-hand side, the orange, we have, depending on actually which way you're looking at your screen and how it's rotated, you're gonna have the orange, which are technical things on platforms, the green, which are focused specifically on data literacy, and the blue that can cover a wide range of professional development issues into which you can integrate data or maybe you don't. It depends on what it is that you're working on. So this is just one idea. There's a bunch of these that I think about all the time, but I don't have time to go into that. I spend a lot of time thinking about what these look like and how things that we offer integrate with what other people do. I would strongly encourage you in your program to do an assessment. Just what platforms do you have? What do people in different roles need to know? And what is the best way to make them able to actually use those platforms in practice every day? All righty. I talk fast, so probably a bunch of you are like, oh, the fire hose just paused for a second that we've been drinking from for the last 45 minutes. Review and questions and answers. So data literacy, the impact of data literacy, integrating data literacy into your program's approach to professional development. And hey, we're here to help. And I'm going to be covering a bunch of different ways I'm going to do that in a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to take a quick breath and ask if there are any questions before we start talking about some of the things that Acorn does. I didn't see any pop into the chat while I was presenting, so we'll give everybody a moment if anybody wants to add it in there. I'm trying to see if there's any hands raised. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or any hands raised in the participants there. So I'll run through what's happening at Acorn, and then I'll come back to the Q&A at the end. We have workshops coming up. Using data workflows is the next one coming up. I will be doing that one. We're going to have some fun looking at the way that data moves through an organization and ways that we can understand how data moves through an organization to basically help with program improvement, but also how understanding that can help you if you're planning future changes to see how those changes might impact what's happening today. We have creating a culture of motivation. That is not really a data related one. That's actually a workshop on how to, as a supervisor or manager in a Head Start program, how to engage with staff to help them feel motivated, comfortable, and I'd say happy to come to work every day, but to the extent that you can control the happiness coming to work every day, it's really about engaging with staff in those ways. So that one's a little bit different from a lot of the ones we have that are data related. Head Start Data Camp. If you have folks that are in any kind of supervisor role, whether they're new to this or they're not, this is really a starting point for understanding how data is used and to engage in some fun activities to sort of get a sense of what that means. The data analyst certificate is coming soon in, actually this says March. That's actually moved to April. We realized that we were going to start our data analyst certificate class right after the government might potentially shut down. So we pushed it back. That's now coming on April 15th. I remember the date because it's tax day. So the data analyst certificate coming April 15th. I apologize. I'll fix that before we send the deck out to everybody at the end. The data analyst certificate is a program for Head Start professionals. It is not training you to go work at Meta or Google or anybody else. That is all about how to identify specific projects that you want to do, how to map the project out, put a team together to achieve it, and then successfully execute that project. About 60% of the learning in the class is Microsoft Excel, learning how to take exports from your existing program management platforms, bring them into Excel, build a refreshable template, meaning you're going to build all of the calculations, visualizations, everything else once. Thanks, Nancy, with the April. Nancy is fixing it as we go for the data analyst certificate. The biggest thing with what you're going to learn how to do is that repeatable template. So you're going to build a template with an export from your program management platform. And what you're going to learn how to do is make that template, remember all the calculations, visualizations, everything else, and then call back to the updated data so that you just push refresh when the updated data is there and all of your things update to the new information. And we have examples in health events that can take place, health screenings, all those kind of things. How do you track those? How do you build span from the time that a person entered the program, their enrollment date to the current date, all kinds of stuff like that. We have attendance data. Probably the most popular part of that whole thing is at the very end where we teach people how to merge data sets. So you've got My Teaching Strategies data set and you have the attendance data out of Go Engage. You can put those together and how you can do some calculations with those. So that's a fun class. I do always want to emphasize it's for Head Start professionals. Excel is the most complicated platform we use. If you can write a formula in Excel, you can join us in the data analyst certificate. We also really emphasize communication with that. So we do practice short talks about what we're doing and the challenges that come along in the projects that everybody works on. Most importantly, you actually do a real data project in that class. One of the assignments is to do an actual data project for your program. So if you have a project that you've always wanted to do but don't have time and you want to carve out a reason to do it, this is a great element for that. You also have office hours, so you have the ability to connect with me every week. And so if you have questions on projects or anything else, you have 20 minutes of my time every week. The data literacy credential, which is also coming in April of 2025, we've mentioned this before. It's a great 8-week, really high-level introduction into data literacy in programs. It is an excellent program that Stuart Jones, who's our CEO, is the person who teaches those. And you'll have lots of video content online with 2 hours a week in Zoom meetings. But the project in that class is actually completing a data literacy training for your staff back in your program. So if you're thinking of having some data literacy trainings and doing those, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Take the data literacy credential, and you will be able to not only craft one of those, but to get a bunch of feedback from some folks who've been working on these kinds of projects for over a decade now. So lots of stuff coming up. Work groups is something that's new. I don't know how widespread knowledge about this is yet. We have 2 cohorts, an executive director cohort and a Head Start leaders cohort. And the work groups are a sustainable professional development and networking program where you will come in with a group of other people in similar roles, and you're going to talk about the challenges you're facing, different ways that best practices suggest those challenges could be faced, and just talking with other folks about how other programs are solving them. Most importantly, it blends that best practice instruction and facilitation with the ability to network with other people in the same position. This is a model that has been around for almost 70 years in the private sector and has been very, very good at building senior level managers and all the way up to CEOs. There's different versions of this, but we're bringing this into the Head Start world. The idea here is these are challenging times. There's a lot going on. You don't have to face these by yourself. Come spend the 2 meetings a month, hour and a half each meeting, and be able to walk through and process these different ways and challenges that you're facing in new ways. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You get best practices, the ability to talk to other folks. It's a very good program. It is a monthly subscription. You basically go through the end of the year, and it's a big deal. If you want more information, you want to sign up for that, acornlearning.com. There's a work groups page there. We're really excited about this one. We think it's going to be fun. The timing of our launch is both good and bad. It's good because you'll have lots of challenges that you might want to process, and it's a little challenging because it keeps everything for some reason, this went backwards. Lots of challenges out there. If you are interested in getting a sense of where you are on data as a program, we have the data capacity assessment, leadership, management culture, data climate, data infrastructure, how everything's going. This is what we call a mixed methods approach. We do interviews, lots of qualitative work with you to see where you are. And we use some quantitative data from staff surveys, but also we do some snapshots of your program data, get a sense of where that is. And then we are able to offer suggestions about areas where you would find that you could make some quick progress, areas where you can do some strength building, and also just kind of give you a really, really good idea of where you realistically are in your program's ability to use data to achieve your program goals. Our next webinar coming up. This is one of our most popular webinars. This is guidance documents, building accessible and user-friendly tools. This is all about, when I talked earlier about documentation and all these other support things, that's what this is about. And it's not just someone from Acorn talking to you. We actually have some of the folks we work with different partner programs talking about specifically how those programs have built these kinds of documents. And we have our 2 partners. We have Adriana and Amanda joining us from Volunteers of America and Shasta Head Start, respectively, and actually talking about what it really looks like in practice in their program. And the link to register for that is down there at the bottom as well. Okay, we didn't have any questions earlier. Do we have anybody who has any questions now? I am finished with my content. In a miracle of miracles, for anybody who knows my presentations, we actually have 7 full minutes at the end instead of about 3, which is usually where I am at the end. So if anyone has questions, feel free to either drop it in the chat or unmute and ask away. If anybody has something where they need to step back out, thank you very much. This concludes everything at this time. And basically, thank you for coming. One last thing I do want to say, everybody, there's a lot going on right now. It's stressful. It's difficult. You took an hour out of your time to join me today. So I said at the beginning, I'm saying it again at the end. Thank you very, very much for coming and joining us. I really appreciate your taking the time to do that. Time is one of the most important things you have, and you spend an hour of it with us. Again, thank you very much. And if you have questions, please feel free to either drop them in the chat or just unmute and ask. Thank you.